Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, which will hopefully be the last non-video video that we have, instead of me showing you the graphics like I'm showing you right now. Today I want to talk about something that we do not talk about, and I don't know how many people are aware of this, because this could be an easy thing that we could add to our average conversation that I think would have a severe impact on the way that everyone views the entire planet, okay? It has to do with the city versus the town. Now, you guys who are longtime listeners, you almost want to throw up in your mouth when I tell you I'm from a small town, because I say it a lot. But I left that small town 35 years ago, and I have spent my life in two of the largest cities that the United States of America has produced, Los Angeles and San Francisco. And then, thank God, back to Los Angeles, Orange County area. Now, I've never lived directly in downtown in a city, you know, like by Times Square or something like that. Thank God. But what's interesting, without living that embedded inside a major city, I have still discovered what I've discovered. And that is that the fabric of society falls apart in a big city. And what's funny is every single one of us who's probably over 25 has said something to this effect, but we don't look at the overwhelming impact of what we're actually saying. The Electoral College is something that was invented to make sure that the population, regardless of where they were in a particular country or what geographical location they were evenly represented. For the handful of you that listened to my politics episode a long time ago, and I wish I had thought up a clever name, more clever name than that, it's about taking you through a scenario of an island. And it's like the show Lost. We all crash on this island, and it's pretty big. And so we've got maybe like a wahoo. We got a coastal region people, they're going to fish, and all their priorities are based on living on the coast, weathering storms that the coast brings in, plus fishing and all the things that fishing need. But there's plenty of plains in the middle where we're growing pineapples and sugarcane, and those people don't know anything about the coastal requirements. They need things that are irrigation-based and planting-based, right? And then there's a tiny group of people that actually make the rounds. They travel between the coast and the plains, and they gather up the needs, and then they represent the opposite to each other to make sure, hey, you got to understand we had that hurricane, and even though it didn't hurt you coastal people, it tore up the crops, and so we're going to have to, move some stuff around. I took you through that scenario, and by the third generation of the children, of the offspring of that liaison group, you basically have makeshift royalty, a monarchy. You want to get something done, we'll grease the palm of that family, because they will either do the right thing or they will do the wrong thing. And if they misrepresent the coastal region to the interior region or the interior region to the coastal region, or they decide to screw both sides, who's going to know? The big thing about a small town that anyone who lives in one or has lived in one or grown up in one knows is that you have to behave. And you have to behave because everybody knows who you are. As soon as you walk in the place, half the time, if you have a real distinct family appearance, they're going to know, oh, that's a so-and-so kid. Never mistake that red hair, those ears, that, whatever, those eyes. But in most cases, they simply went to school with your parents, your aunts, your uncles. Maybe, depending on what age, they went to school with your grandparents. If you are not polite, if you don't hold the door by the age you're supposed to hold the door, you're toast. If you were to steal something from a store, you're toast. If you drive recklessly down the street and you don't even hit anybody, but you're making too much noise, you're playing your stereo too loud, anything that's going on, you can be toast in 2 seconds. And so everyone's careful. Now, believe me, they have a lot of fun in little towns too. There's always a way to kind of sneak something in and that kind of stuff, which is, for some people, the big challenge. So you're not in some concentration camp by any means. You're in a place where, like Dave Chappelle says, don't break the fucking law and your life will be fine. But you'll also find that you have what you need. And probably a little bit more, if not a lot more, depending on how much you hustle. There's a fabric of the Midwest, and there's a Midwest in every single country around the planet. And then you start getting towards the city, a more populated area that has been pawned off when I was young. It's been pawned off as the greatest achievement of mankind, stuffing a bunch of people into a single area. I remember reading about London being claimed as being the first city in the history of the world to have 1 million people. Probably not true. Probably Baghdad. Probably some other Babylonian place. But okay, so what? What came out of the Londons of the world? The fucking plague came out of that stuff because people got so absolutely unhealthy, shitting where they ate, and not knowing that there was a problem with that. You got rats. You have bacteria that just goes crazy. Microbes that crawl around on submicron levels called viruses. But the biggest thing about a city is accountability. Nobody knows who the fuck you are in a city. Again, it's amazing the mathematics of a city. You could sit on a street with the sign that just basically tells everyone to go fuck themselves. If there weren't cell phones to record you and make that go viral, no one would know who you were, and you would never see them again, and they never see you again. In a big city, you could probably flip somebody off. And the odds of you ever running into them again, even if you have to, even though you might travel the same path to work and home, stays the same for 20 fucking years, you may never see these people again. And that creates that weird thing that young kids get. We've all been there. You're out of town and you misbehave, right? Every kid in the planet, I think, at least the United States, has had this thing. Boy or girl, you're from somewhere, you go someplace else, and you're at a bar, you're having a good time, you're at a wedding, a party, whatever. You're vacationing, and you go into town and you're just like, man, I could be a total dick because nobody knows who I am. And you do. And, you know, on one level, there's a psychological relief that all the pressure came off, that you can do something a little crazy. You kind of feel alive because constraints can, you know, get overwhelming over a prolonged period of time. But in a big city, it all falls apart. You can do things. Why are there tons of murders in big cities and barely any in a small town? And when they happen in a small town, we know who did it. And we know the personal situation behind it. We just had 2 murders in my hometown, which is rare as shit, okay? One was a couple fucking meth heads, boyfriend, girlfriend. They had a dispute. The chick goes out into the alleyway and just blows his ass away for some reason. She got caught. Another one was the guy was cheating on another dude's wife, and the husband found out, and he went over and shot the dude. I always tell you guys, we solve problems a little bit different in the Midwest. I dare say, even though that guy most likely didn't want to get shot, he absolutely knew he had earned his keep. He earned that issue. He earned being shot by Midwestern rules. You got to check shit and protocol it out, and she's got to get separated and divorced and all that stuff before, you know. And you may go over to your buddy and go, hey, you know, man, I love you, brother, but, you know, your ex and I are kind of, you know, we found something compatible between us. Is it okay with you? You know, and you look him in the eyes and make sure he's not going to blow your head off. Big city? Yeah. Nobody knows anybody in Central Park when they rape the shit out of you. I don't know if you guys know, but there's another one. It's not really related to what we're talking about, but apparently in a lot of national parks, people have been disappearing for decades in national parks. Like they'll be with some people or hiking by themselves, but even if they're with people, if they're too far behind, they just get nabbed off the back and nobody ever finds their bodies. It's like, seriously, what the hell's going on with this place? But my focus with this particular episode is to get you to understand that society's perversion, society's fucking problems, almost fucking all of them, are spawning out of these cities. Any city you pick it. Look at Japan. Japan is known for creating the craziest crap on the internet. I mean, if it's pornographic material, it is absolutely ridiculous. They're just known for it. But they also have crazy TV shows and all this other stuff, and it's mainly in Tokyo, a place that has 40 million people. To put that in perspective, that's more people than Los Angeles and all of its surrounding counties combined, almost doubled. And you know what? I got that 40 million several years ago. And I should technically say it's the greater Tokyo area. Just like when we talk about the population in Los Angeles, we always say about 25 million because we are all connected. You drive through all these areas. But anyway, Tokyo, yeah, it's up to 38 million people if you do the surrounding areas. But if you go out to the farmland and you study the rules that the schools have for the kids, you realize if you show up to school with Kool-Aid hair, they will cut your fucking hair off. They'll come to your house and cut your hair off. Very strict rules in the rural areas. Now, sadly, the way this game is being played is they want to make you feel Hollywood, television, internet, they want to make all the debauchery, all the perversion seem like it's the most amazing thing you could possibly be involved in. When in the end, it's sort of like you're completely a sucker. The thing is, it's one thing to bring something together and have it have a name and a purpose. And then it's a whole nother game to hold it together. It's sort of like the House of Cards or the million domino setup in some gymnasium, right? It's sad that a lot of human beings have never done anything like that. They've never taken a week out of their life to build something up that can be destroyed with an exhale from another human being. It's actually extremely important to experience this. Now, a lot of times, it just has to do with something like cooking. You cook this amazing dessert. I mean, you spend ages, meaning hours, maybe a couple days, prepping this thing up. Some delicate chocolate thing or something, I don't know. And then you just serve it, and everybody loves it, and they eat it, and you eat it, and it tastes amazing. When I build my Reuben sandwiches, it takes forever to get all the right ingredients from the right places. But man, when you eat it, oh my God. Tears the shit out of the roof of your mouth, but it's great. So what's the overall plan of the ruling retards? Oh, we need to make that a standard thing. They want to condense everyone down inside these Agenda 21 cities. In terms of having a house, a yard, some freedom, pool, you're never going to have those things again. Ever, ever, ever. Everyone's going to live inside of glorified apartment complexes with merchant stuff down below. And you know, here's what's weird about it. Because you and I know freedom, let's just say you've lived in a house at some point in your lifetime, you've enjoyed sitting on your patio, your porch, just chilling out. You and I know that apartment living can suck balls, right? Because you got an adjoining wall with somebody else, and if they fucking allow somebody to have a little chirping dog in there, and you're trying to sleep, it can get rough. Hey, even if someone has a baby, a beautiful thing, and the baby's just going to cry. It's just what babies do. And you got to get up the next morning to do something really important. That's why we have houses. That's why we allow people to be separated and go through their experiences. Husband and wives kind of shouting it out a little bit because they just need to blow some steam off or better understand themselves. And that can ruin your whole day. That could traumatize your kids. But in a house, you got at least 20 feet between the homes. And where I grew up, you had half an acre between houses, right? Not downtown, but out in the country. You could play your stereo at night. You could sing. You could play a piano. And the neighbors barely even know it's occurring if you hook up your house right. All that stuff will be gone. But what's most important is the fabric of society when there's no accountability. Because there's always some asshole somewhere, right? Someone taking advantage of somebody else. And it never matters to you, usually. I mean, it matters to us because we're empathetic and intelligent. But a lot of people just blow it off until it hits them in the pocket. And that's a metaphor. It comes back on them. Their kid's the one that gets raped and murdered in a parking lot of a Target. Their spouse disappears. Their husband gets mugged and blown away. Just because he needed to go down to the drugstore in the middle of the night. Just had to. In fact, he had to go because one of his kids was sick. He's actually fine. Homelessness. Oh my God. Homelessness goes rampant in the big city because there is a mortar between the bricks of empathy and caring. They can exist on Skid Row, downtown Los Angeles. For those of you who've never been to Los Angeles and you don't have this kind of problem where you live, let me describe it for you. In 2015, it's probably last time I got a good exposure prior to what's been going on after the coup. You have downtown Los Angeles, like if you technically didn't have them there, you'd have some of the cleanest, nicest little industrial businesses down there. You know, you could have a movie studio inside a warehouse or just plain up storage. Nice roads, nice buildings. However, for decades, there has been this spot down there. I'd say it would be a square 6 blocks down there in 2015. More concentrated in areas than others. But you have a whole population that lives there. They live inside tents. And they come and they go and they die. And they get exploited. They get trafficked. It's absolutely nuts. But that's the way it was in 2015. And there's a protocol when you actually walk down the street. It's really not wise to make eye contact, but it's also not wise to completely ignore them. They actually, in 2015, were pretty decent about not coming up to you and asking you for money because they know you're screwed. If you give them one dime, then another person's going to walk up because there's tons of people down there, tents, where it's not technically allowed by the city ordinance. They're not allowed to do it. But down there, there's 13-year-old girls doing drugs and selling their bodies, being pimped by some other drug addict down there. The cops know it, but they don't even try to pick up these minors who because they don't pick them up because they have no parents. They have nothing. A lot of them escaped foster care because they were getting raped in foster care. So why not just be on the street? At least somewhat pick who rapes you. I mean, how horrible is that? But that's the truth. Watch the soft white underbelly on YouTube. One interview after another. Just crazy. No accountability. No accountability. Well, that allows shit like Eyes Wide Shut to happen. Sophisticated suffering. Sophisticated rituals. It would be hilarious to see like the Church of Satan try to open up a church in my hometown. Every human would be lynched. The fucking place would be burned down. And that's if they snuck in a name change on a building, right? Now, a classic building, they would most likely find a way just to get rid of the people and what's inside. And it's not to say that the Masonic Lodge down the street probably hasn't done something like that internally. But an outright Church of Satan, oh my God, they would come from miles around to tear that place down. Oh, big cities, no problem. Big cities have plenty of perversion, plenty of mentally fucking insane people who, when life doesn't go their fucking way, which is usually a research nothing, know everything, zero effort human beings, well, they turn into those people. For some fucking reason, as soon as they realize their life has gone out of absolute fucking control, and they're going to become a useless stain on the underwear of society. They go down and buy hair coloring. I don't know what it is. I don't know what the fuck it is. What color you need? We're talking about, Kool-Aid hair. Somebody rumored to me, it was actually kind of funny, rumored to me that they had poisoned the hair dye. And I thought, what's kind of funny about that is it makes complete sense. It makes complete fucking sense. I have rarely seen anyone with hair dye that doesn't have a fucking serious mental issue. I'll give you a couple examples from my own personal lifespan. 20 years ago, I helped run a restaurant, a buddy of mine, and he had this gorgeous waitress who was just absolutely, I don't know, she was beautiful in school, very celebrated, had great friends. I think she played soccer in high school, definitely in high school, but she got a soccer scholarship in college. And at some point, she decided to color her hair. And when I say color hair, I mean prime colors that children wear, a lot of black, a lot of white, bleaching. One day I had to take her home for some reason, and I had to chill with her at her place. She lived with this old man that she rented a room from. And I went to the restroom, and I look in this bathtub. Now, it was a one-piece shower bathtub, and it was injection molded pink, like Pepto-Bismol. That's just the natural color of this fucking bathroom. And she was kind of in a black hair phase at the time, but she'd do everything. But this fucking bathtub was just splattered. As if no one had the ability. Old man was so old that he couldn't bend over to pick up a piece of paper. But she was young. But no home training at the time. Place looked like a fucking shithole. And she was suffering suddenly from depression. Her friends were like, I don't know what's wrong with her. She used to be great, she used to be bright, and now she's just kind of meh. I never could figure that girl out. Fast forward. Another place I helped. Girl who looked almost identical to the other girl. But this is 20 years later. Now this new one is almost the same age as the one that was back 20 years ago. And this chick was coloring her hair every single day. She kept it bleached white so she could constantly recontour the shape. It'd be fucking blue. Very beautiful girl. Very California girl. But one time I went there, and I just happened to take a friend with me. It's Friday night. We're about to transition over to karaoke and a bunch of stuff. And I'm just there to make sure everything's cool. And all of a sudden, I hadn't seen the bartender, waitress, for a long time, and she's already, checked in and stuff, and it's still not quite the evening kickoff hours. I go back there, and this chick is fucking gone insane. Insane. She can barely speak. She's got some weird stage fright thing. She has been a waitress at this place for like 6 months, and is a kick-ass waitress. I met her, coincidentally, at a bowling alley a couple miles away, where she works a crowd of like 60 people with no problem whatsoever. And all of a sudden, on a Friday night for us, she goes fucking insane. Kool-Aid hair. I don't know. It's kind of off topic, but you guys let me know. Study people that you know. Your kids. Have they started to have mental issues after they get that shit in their hair? But big cities. Big cities are the reason why the Electoral College has to fucking continue to exist. I would almost wager that if you surpass some feasible amount of population, and which could be judged simply by the fact that you ask the city, hey, what's your standard of living for your citizens? And we think that standard of living is that every family should have a house, so much yardage, and so much space between homes. If you cannot provide that for your citizens, then we're going to take down your Electoral College contribution to the overall vote, because you have become a fucking parasite on the back of the country itself. No excuses. I don't give a shit if you got a big factory and you're trying to tell me that you have to live like this because you got a big factory. No. You're going to have to figure out a way. Build your housing outside of town. It's flat. It has a standard of living Looks like Back to the Future or E.T. or Poltergeist neighborhood. Maybe it's not a 2,500 square foot house. Maybe it's a 1,200 square foot house for some folks that don't have a lot of money. Hell, maybe it's even one of those little studio houses that my hometown has after World War II. But what do? Where is all of the accolades? You're somebody if you move to a big city, isn't that right? What I have found is I have never needed to live directly inside a big city to visit it whenever I want to visit it. I've never lived in Los Angeles downtown, but I have lived around Los Angeles for the better part of, 25 years. I'm either north an hour or I'm south 35 minutes. When I lived near San Francisco, I was always south, either 30 minutes or an hour, depending on where I lived at the time. If I wanted to go in to see a concert or eat a dinner or whatever, most of the time it wasn't a hassle. Towards the late 90s, it started becoming impossible to park in the city. People would invite you to their birthday party. There was no Uber. And you simply would have to go home. You would get there, you would drive in a circle with your wine and your gifts for them, and you'd finally just turn around and go home because you're not going to park your car and take a cab. You get mugged everywhere in San Francisco. Unlike any city I've ever known. I've walked in the middle of the night in New York all over the place. No one ever came up to mug me. San Francisco, every single one of my friends who lived in San Francisco proper got mugged. A couple at gunpoint. One had his car stolen. One had their car broken into. There's this weird competition globally to build the biggest cities. And what's really sort of an oxymoron to the whole thing is that at the same exact time, Agenda 21, 2030 is really saying that, well, we don't really want a ton of people on this planet. But when we do get down to the reservoir, we barely want your feet to touch the floor, which is why we're going to build up. When I got here in 1987, California was run by a Republican governor. The place was exactly as you know it from the 80s movies. Now, probably Less Than Zero was going on as well, but Sherman Oaks Galleria looked just like Fast Times at Ridgemont High. People were kind. People wanted to help each other. People did feel lucky to be here. Now, I don't know what's going on in South Central. Again, when you let the CIA sell you drugs or give you drugs to then sell in your neighborhood, and you can't really complain about how much trouble you get in with the police. Again, like Dave Chappelle said, don't break the law and, your life will be great. But I also ended up at a lot of places where either commercial properties where there was sort of this inadvertent invitation to join the people, like a Rodeo Drive walk back in the late 80s was amazing. The amount of art down there was crazy. Not so much today. It's real consumer based today. There was always consumerism in Rodeo Drive, but I mean, you would walk into a place that had a tapestry on the wall that was like, 400 years old with its papers. Plus, you'd have local artists that would pull giant chunks of glass into these sculptures, all on this kind of Star Trek Next Generation podium that you could observe. But I had my little parties where, again, people would invite me. You wouldn't know when you woke up in the morning you were going to end up at some beach house that looks like, Tony Stark's joint in Iron Man. But you would find yourself at parties. And I was very fortunate. I was around some really, really good people. But anytime I got out of my local friend circles, which does account for the majority of my good experiences, I would bump into parties where I could see the pressure to join them. And if they had been some eyes wide shut group, there's this weird thing when you walk into a world where you're like, oh my God, I'd love to have this beach house in Malibu. I'd work really hard to get this. Now, if someone just doing the less than zero thing, which if, for those of you who don't know what that means, that's a movie made in the late 80s, starring Robert Downey Jr., where he ends up being prostituted around Los Angeles. You bait someone with something that they want, and then you create the only path for them to get it, is basically to sell their soul. Guns N' Roses opened up their career with a song called Welcome to the Jungle, didn't they? What was that about? That's the story of kids coming from the Midwest, mostly girls, of course, and finding themselves at a bad American Idol audition. It's like Prince said, when you got a baby, nothing comes too hard. Well, when you don't have it, but all you have is that she bang audition, they know that you're not that smart and that you're gullible and that they can basically entrap you. So they find these girls with super low IQs but hot bodies. In 6 months, they're out of money and they have to make a choice. Go home with your tail between your legs because you've overbuilt what you're supposed to get from the city in the first place, or take a little acting job where you won't wear any clothes and you'll get to know a lot of guys. And then, hey, I know you're depressed, so here's some drugs to keep you from feeling so bad. Now, see, you feel so much better, don't you? Oh, that's great. Yeah. Hey, you know that money that you were supposed to make from doing this little film with my brother sleeping with you and stuff? Well, you know, because you took the drugs, it's about 70% of the money. So here's enough to get us ham sandwich. See you later. You know, I've said it a couple of times. I had a client in the 90s who was a former porn star. And I talked to her on the phone once because we're trying to figure out a way to craft her website. And she was just telling me how horrible it was. But what's her story? She's from the Midwest, came out here, had a dream, got totally perverted. Now, it is not like there aren't pockets of crazy JonBenet Ramsey shit going on in the Midwest that are the byproduct of being away from society, right? So you're so private that the perverts do things like Bohemian Grove and that kind of stuff. That's a separate issue. That, I think, is something I think we understand well. The thing I don't think we understand that well, and we don't talk about it much, is the perversion of highly populated areas. Sodom and Gomorrah stories, right? Regardless if it ever happened, it's still a story. Once the cities got together, it fell apart. And isn't it interesting that when societies push together, like, say, the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire, who knows exactly what happened in the area we call Egypt. But you're just essentially tribes people, right? And once you come together, then you start to unify and call yourself something, and that's where you sort of have an identity. In America, and maybe around the world it's the same way, they have something called a township. A township is a 6-mile square. Just a piece of land, square, that's 6 miles in any one side, and that's what you call a town if you fill it up with people. I don't know what the minimum population is, but it's pretty darn small to get actually announced as a town. But cities are weird. Take Burning Man. Get a bunch of people together. You've probably got about 30 to 40% of Burning Man people, when it was good, were actually regulars. They bring the drugs, they bring the alcohol, they bring whatever. But they also bring the perverted brains a lot of times. But then the other 60 to 70% are normal people that have never been to such a thing. Now, in some cases, again, they can get enlightened, take a little LSD, a little mushrooms, whatever. But if the idea is to loosen up their mind to then sell them a bunch of other shit. Oh, yeah, you know, there's that van over there with all those people. You should just get in there. And then when you start tripping balls, they're all going to start having sex with you. But they're all really nice. You know, we're going to give you some Molly and some E, and which basically rots your brain, chemically destroys parts of your brain. And you're going to do a bunch of stuff, and then you're going to regret it. You're never going to tell another soul because it'll just show how dumb you were. how gullible you were. In the end, you were tricked. Anybody can trick anybody. If that wasn't true, magicians wouldn't exist. Snake oil salesman would have never become a household word, right? What's interesting is over the years, over the decades I've been in California, I've definitely talked to one of two folks, and there's not a third version. There's people that understand that cities are very dangerous, both physically, mentally, and spiritually. And so they live on the outskirts in a nice area. One, that's affordable. But two, they don't have 50 locks on the back of their house. And then the person I talk to that has to live in the city. And they'll make a comment about, I just can't even imagine this burbia thing. Ugh, bleh. And it's funny. Because the person who has to live in the city, it's a really exhibitioned, externalized superiority complex. And it doesn't necessarily have to be pointed at you that they need you to react and feel less than them. Sometimes that's the case. That's actually pretty rare. But this is a psychosis within the person. There's a bar that has been set inside their mind that means success. If they go to the rural area, they feel like they're failures. For those people like Johnny Depp who just literally grew up walking around the streets of Sunset, probably being whored out to everybody until he became famous and made enough money to control a little bit of the how's your father's, right? I'm sure a guy like that could look at Burbia and say, man, I just don't feel comfortable because I don't understand it. Like a person who's been in prison most of their life has a problem living out in the public because they just have these fears that are unfounded, that maybe everyone hates them or they don't feel comfortable because they don't know how to operate a cell phone, all those weird things, right? How many movies, how many songs, big city life, big city this, right? Alicia Keys made one of the most amazing songs talking about New York. And there are things to love about most cities. I mean, you walk in, you see them in their best days. It is phenomenal. And there was a time, I think, when big cities still had accountability. What also happens more often than not in a big city that is less prevalent and less intense than a small town. Corruption of the law enforcement layer that is supposed to defend you against those that would violate your common law. We know in San Francisco there was a homeless guy that stabbed and murdered, I think, a 27, 28-year-old girl. Killed her, and they let the motherfucker off. That's something that a big city can do to you. Now, that girl has a father, and that girl has a mother, and maybe a brother and sister, but definitely a father and a mother, and they had to go into a court and watch the justice system say, because there's this George Soros political fucking agenda on top of us, and we're all Democrat pieces of shit, we're letting this guy kill your fucking daughter, and he's going to be free. And he was an immigrant, too. I don't think he was even legal. Now, regardless if he was an immigrant, imagine that shit going down in my small town. Imagine the cop and the judge trying to take a bribe on the side to let this motherfucker off. It would never fucking work. They wouldn't take the bribe because they would say, if I let this guy go, and it becomes evident at some point in my life I've taken a bribe to do so, not only is that guy going to get killed, but they're going to kill me too. And ain't no one investigating my death. Because it will have been the town that did it. Expressing their loyalty to the law. But in a big city, murders can happen over and over and over again. And hey, nothing you can do about it. It's not every single time. But it's getting way worse, isn't it? Big cities. They're a dangerous creation for all of society. And I don't care what city you name, they're a dangerous creation that should probably not exist. Meaning, don't get excited about a fucking skyscraper getting built. that is either an apartment complex or some business, some fucking bank that needs to stick its giant phallus into the skies. You have to look at it every single day. How many people have seen the projects from New York, the Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, getting built up and then blown up and then built up, blown up? How many of you have seen that shit in China? Everyone's living in just gigantic towers, all in apartment complexes, while 80% of the land over there is uninhabited in China, to the west. Uninhabited farmland. All because of why? Well, Shanghai, Beijing, Shenzhen, all these major cities that have all of the industrial factories are there. Well, they didn't have to do it that way. It serendipitously happened that way, and that's just like most cities in the world. That's fine. Now it's time to spread out. California, as dense as it is, has a tremendous amount of land that's not inhabited. Spread out. Make it look pretty. It's hard to dress up the pig that is the big giant apartment building. What's going on in my area is that Agenda 21 buildings are being built, and it's essentially 2 to 4 floors over a merchant floor. Sometimes they go as high as maybe like 6 or 7 floors in Irvine. And of course, the big thing is that they want you to go downstairs and live off of all of the groceries and coffee and shit downstairs. It never ever works. And so most of the merchants downstairs have to be subsidized by the rent, which makes everyone's rent go up. And by the way, there's massive HOAs at these places. Some places are paying $650 a month HOA fees in a fucking apartment complex because it doesn't work. Downtown, I should say, there's downtown HB, and then there's sort of like the main street, which is Beach Boulevard. And they did one where they had a ice cream place and a haircut joint, some other thing. It's a fucking graveyard downstairs. But the whole thing was, hey, your customers are upstairs, no big problem. Doesn't work. It financially doesn't work, and that's the funniest thing. It's like I told you several episodes ago, you want to know how important freedom is? Take any creature in the universe and put it in a container and watch what it tries to do. From a fucking ant to an elephant, they're going to try to get out of the container. It's just natural. Freedom is what God built every single being to want. Except for maybe Chinese people. I don't know how they did it. But every other intelligent being on planet Earth wants to fucking be free. And that's why they celebrate countries like China and North Korea. I mean, talk about bosom buddies and inbred cousins, man. They're completely fine with being in a fucking tyrannical social credit system, one way or the other. North Korea's got a social credit system way longer than China. In North Korea, in some regions, you have to get up and tattletale on each other every fucking morning in a group meeting, keeping everyone on their toes, keeping everybody in some acidic, cancerous state of being. And so what people do to survive that process of having to tell on each other every fucking morning is that people broker with each other about, okay, I'll tell on you today. And I thinking, maybe I say you did that because it's not that bad. And then if you could just say, I did this, or it's some round robin thing. China just has a social credit system, right? Straight up in your fucking face. You better tell your controller you're going to have a party if you buy some alcohol, because they'll mark you down as a drunk if you don't. The rest of the intelligent world has to fight this shit. But this is a systemic one. This is not one that you can just go down on a fucking corner in a major city and hold up a sign and have anybody change anything. This is going to require that we advance our dialogue to take a little bit of the piss out of big cities. For those of you that don't live in a big city, you have grandkids and kids that are essentially trying to tell you that they're going to go get fucking, their biggest accomplishment in the universe in a big city. It's not that living next to a big city is the big problem. It is live outside the big city should be the objective. Again, I was extremely lucky to serendipitously not land or not have to live inside a major city. There was always affordable property outside, and the cities cost way more than the suburban area, which I always thought was hilarious. It was like, great, take the shittiest part of what's going on in this area and make it cost more, so I don't want to be a part of that shitty thing. Great. One of my friends, who I wouldn't say is the sharpest fucking knife in the cupboard drawer, she moved to San Francisco and rented an apartment downtown. It was some dinky, tiny apartment in a totally crime-ridden area. And this was like 12 years ago. $3,000 a month. Not safe to go to your car. You had to be inside by the time the fucking sun set. Awesome. Killing it, right? If you live in a small town, what I want you to understand is you didn't lose. I don't know how many times I go back to my Midwest community and I'll hear people like deprecate themselves, right? They'll well, I'm just a dumb hick here in the Midwest. And they're not trying to solicit anything from me or make me feel bad. They truly feel, some people, and I understand this, they feel less of a human being because they stayed in a small community. Some people know they won, though. Some people know that they've won without ever going to a major city. Something just deep inside their heart lets them know, you're the winner. They're the ones that are crazy. Now, sometimes they stay in small towns because they're absolutely terrified of traffic of a big city. And hey, I wouldn't want them to have any weakness in their system. But whatever it takes to keep them away from perversion, exploitation, danger, just as long as they don't pipe it in through Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, HBO. The amount of shit I see on TV about various cultures and various people that is so fucking wrong, so inaccurate, is almost categorical. To say I've seen a show on TV that represented a sector of society in a very accurate way, especially when that's the pitch going around Hollywood. Oh man, I gotta watch this because it's really good. It's very accurate. It never is. The Italian Bambino is one of the most nauseating fucking characters you could ever see in Hollywood. And what's funny is I have some friends that have paid to be exactly that on television. And they're from New York and they're from Brooklyn and, you know, they're in deeper areas. But the people that I've met that are really the true backbone, they're the blood and the bone of Brooklyn at its most intense level, don't act anything like it. Sure, their accents are New Yorker accents, but these are normal people that, you know, depends on who they are and how you piss them off or something. Maybe they do have a little bit more pull here and there. They're willing to do more than you because they're from a bigger city and they've dealt with much more intense situations. But in the end, Hollywood just can't seem to upgrade the algorithm. And there's so much more story on the other side of normality on this whole thing. It might seem a little insane to do an episode strictly on cities and how bad they are, how dangerous they are. What's really strange about it is that there are most likely, obviously, big cities that are doing just fine. There is accountability. The cops aren't corrupt. The judges aren't corrupt. The politicians aren't corrupt. Not sure where the fuck that would be. But even Los Angeles, where we know everything's corrupt. Every single layer is corrupt. Why? Because this is a big city. This plays a big role in voter results. This plays a big role in moving agendas. When you want to sway and wag the public, just like Gavin Newsom said several times, what we do, people copy. I'm not sure that's true, but he's going at the jugular of what I would have believed when I was a kid. It's hard to see movie after movie that entertains you. And to be an uneducated youth like I was when I first came out here, they used to ask me, what brought you out to California? And I said, well, I probably saw too many beer commercials, too many movies. And they would laugh, and then I wouldn't laugh because I was like, yeah. And that song, I Love LA. You will be in Los Angeles and you will feel the magic of the last 150 years in this area. At least the last 100 maybe 30 years in this area when Charlie Chaplin was owned the whole fucking place, man. I don't know if you know that, but he owned almost all the land downtown. He sold it off. It was his film studio. LA was Charlie Chaplin's film studio. There's been some really wonderful people in all the cities around the world. That's why they got famous. Usually. They've all had their heyday. Dallas, Texas has had its heyday with Jean Jarre, projecting lasers on all the buildings and doing a concert downtown impromptu when nobody knew it was going to occur. That kind of stuff. New York was the place to watch New Year's happen. LA is Hollywood, the movies, da-da-da-da. And, yes, it's grown to be a very corrupt place. And I'm sure at all times, some scumbag was finding prey and exploiting opportunity for results. But I would be shocked if in, say, Rod Serling's Twilight Zone production that he would ever be a part of anything that was doing anything. He was a man of principles. I'm going to say, however high the IQ meter goes, he was the standard that set it, Can we take a city and put together some policies that actually fix them? I'd say secure the vote. Every country's got to pass a law to forbid propaganda from being on television, or at least broadcast as truth, which basically means you can't lie. I remember after that quiz show in the 50s where the guy actually was getting the answers and he was winning. After that scandal broke that he was winning because he got all the answers and the public was like, oh my God, we're following this guy forever, but it's not true. Congress came together and passed a bill that basically said you can't lie on TV. Now, of course, they ignored that law, even though it was law during a lot of the 60s propaganda stuff, right? But you got to basically make it impossible, near impossible, if not possible, to misrepresent the issue. Make sure that when your citizens try to get educated about something, they can actually get educated about it. Now, some people might say that, okay, well, their surveillance state is all about turning a big city into a small town by videotaping every single movement that's going on. And I would disagree that will be an outcome of accountability. The problem is the corrupt will use that to frame people. They'll also, just like we always see, if something happens, Epstein gets killed in a basement at a jail cell, and of course none of the cameras worked that day. There was a building in I think September of 2001 that supposedly had a plane hit it, and the greater Washington, D.C. area, and there was like 500 cameras that are supposed to be on in that area. And gosh darn it, the tape ran out on all of them, right? So in terms of that actually solving the crime issue, yeah. Plus, imagine you got a telephone application that can erase the doggy out of your front yard taking a poo because you want a really nice postcard shot to send out for the holidays of your front yard. So you just touch the dog and he goes away. Okay, well, someone's doing a crime somewhere where they're not supposed to. And you're not even there, but they want you to be the person that's fingered for it. So that software erases the guy that did it and puts you in his place. And with artificial intelligence creating artwork, which is basically half the time 3D objects being created and then casting light on them and then putting them in places. Oh my God, they could put you anywhere they want you. And everyone's will be up in arms for a little while, and then eventually they'll forget about you about 12 days later. I want to remind you guys too, as we look at trends of any kind, what is accepted by society and what isn't accepted by society? Because someone could say, this whole episode for me is just No Country for Old Men. Oh, you're an old-fashioned guy that wants that kind of thing to happen. And it's not that you don't, maybe if you were to say that, you don't think that it's not a good idea. It's just you've surrendered because you never experienced it before, perhaps. But the number is 23. I'm sure there's different numbers for different people, but the study I heard was that in 23 years, society is so renewed due to the machine of propaganda called the television or the internet, that the youth that is born 23 years after an event occurs has a demonstrably less chance of ever knowing that event occurred. So we know that in 2001 in September, this big fucking thing happened that put the whole world in a ridiculous level of tyranny that somehow intelligent people don't want to reverse. I mean, that should be just the talk of the town until it's reversed, right? So what they're saying is that in 2024, next year, a child born next year has next to no chance of ever studying that event ever occurred. And if it's brought up, it'll be like me learning about Pearl Harbor. What else? Now, of course, the people go to New York and look at the memorial. What about the 93 bombing? What about the 95 Oklahoma bombing? What about all this stuff that we try to track today? 23 years after, the average human being has no clue what history did before then, unless they go and research it. We know that the world is run on trends. I just want to remind you, our trend right now is to study the past. Our trend right now is to uncover the corrupt and their mechanisms. But what if this trend didn't last very long? I mean, it's lasted quite a while, and it seems to be kind of reaching a nice vibration at this point. But what if it becomes the passé thing to do? How scary is that? But before I finish this off, I just want to remind you that little towns are also under attack. Charlotte Iserby, a woman that wrote a book called The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America, and I think 1973, I used to have a copy of this book. It's massive. It's physically like big on the desk, and it's thick. Her father was a skull and bones dude. And she said that she was in the New England educational system when this group of people came over from Europe and said, we're here to change America, and here's the new rules you're going to follow. Of course, a lot of people are like, who the fuck are you? And a bunch of people are like, okay. But the two things that happened to my particular hometown that have absolutely strained it or destroyed it is one, they put in a big supermarket called Walmart. It used to be there was Walmart and a grocery store. Now it's just this big super Walmart. And these people worship the place. They work there and they worship the place. It sucked all the business out of downtown. But then they did the second tier, which is to strategically move the school either to the edge of town or outside of town to strain the economy of all the people who live inside, because you have to get your kids to school and you have to pick them up. And now they're, 2 or 3 miles out of town. All the grade schools are in some concentration camp on the west side of town. I mean, it looks like shit, this place. Corrugated steel. It's all brown gray. I mean, it's like, oh my God, this has nothing to do. All the schools that the kids should be going to are gorgeous Art Deco buildings built in the 30s and 40s. Completely up to standard, no problem. But someone sold them, a bunch of bullshit. This woman came in from out of nowhere, not born and raised. Remember what I said in World Wag 3? She's not born and raised in her hometown. She came in as some outside consultant, had friends, flying quotes, who were construction people. She lies to the people and says, oh, we're going to build this for $2 million and that for 10. Well, the $2 million thing cost $11 million. And the $10 million thing, I think, cost $25 million. And then she left. She got her friends the contracts and left. They tore down a 3-story brownstone high school, which had just been retrofitted about 10 years earlier to be completely perfect. I mean, new I-beams and stuff inside. I mean, they spent a shit ton of money. And for about 5 years, the kids at the school never got to go to the school like I did because it was under construction. But I went right after they finished it. It was phenomenal. They tore it down. And now they actually thanked it because they tore it down and built a new high school. I guess all the IQs and aptitude and skill sets of the teachers also upgraded just because the container you're standing in is brand new. Meanwhile, the poorest kids on the north side of town have to get rides from people. So be aware that wherever you live on this planet, if you're in a rural area, your days are numbered and they're a hell of a lot shorter than you think. Unless we start to increase the communication about this stuff. Again, everything falls under Rosa Koire research, Koire research of Agenda 21, aka renamed Agenda 2030. 21 stands for 21st century, 2030 is the deadline that they're going for, which means they've got a lot of work to do because they want a ton of destruction. When I look at, the average group of people in America, I mean, it's sort of like that Vice. I think it was a Vice documentary to North Korea, and it's one where these 2 older gentlemen, I think in their 50s or more, went over there, and they snuck footage and just did what everybody does who goes to North Korea. But they get back to South Korea and they look at all the kids who are enjoying their lives and like they should be able to. But here they were just in a militant country north of that place, just across the border. And this one dude turns to the camera and quietly says, if North Korea ever wanted to take this place, they would take it in a heartbeat. And why is that? Because every male up there, although shorter and malnutritioned, they've been raised in military. The women have been raised in the military. And that tiny little difference is everything. The only way you want to have prosperity in this planet is everybody gets the prosperity at the same time, to the same degree, relative to what they consider to be prosperity, right? So an African might disagree with the bullet list that they need for prosperity than a South American Peruvian Indian, right? I also want to loop back on my Charles Manson episode because I had a couple flubs in there. The ranch that I looked up, it was a website for the Barker Ranch that they are trying to effectively usurp the tourism to their ranch. And so they bought a lot of keywords for Spawn Ranch, which is much closer to the Tate House. Okay, so that was a screw up. I was telling you it was really far away. It's still a fair amount away, but it's nowhere near the exaggeration it seems like in the episode. The other thing I realized after I was finished, because I continued doing research, is that Charlie Manson was actually found completely innocent of telling anyone to kill anybody. They actually concluded that in court. And they also never came up with another family member, in flying quotes, that came up to and said, hey, yeah, I'm one of the other 17 members of the ranch, and he was telling us to kill black people or rich people or whatever. Not a single person was pulled in. Now, I had this genius approach me on the side and tell me that Charles Manson wasn't in jail because his beard was over an inch long, and the prison that he belongs to doesn't allow beards over an inch. I just so happen to have a very close friend of mine who used to be a fairly well-known reporter in the Bay Area. And on a number of occasions when he would have to do a story at the prison where Charlie was being held at any one point in time, there was always this fucking weird thing the prison would do, which is private for profit by this time. They'd say, do you want to see Charlie Manson? And only on one occasion did he say yes. He figured, if I saw him once, and he's thinking it's not going to be the way it's going to go down in real life. But what ends up happening is they take him to Charlie Manson's cell, which has the little sliver window in it, right? He stares inside, and Charlie's lying down on his bunk. He's in like a solitary situation. He's facing the wall, clearly him. And I suppose that he turns around and he goes, he just knew they were there, and he says, take the tour somewhere else. The zoo is closed. And that patented 5'3" voice of his, right? But the offer came several times for my buddy. So in terms of him as, being a pass-through, which is something that I have talked about on this show for 7 years for other people in the world, very well aware that that could be the way things go down. And I think it has for some people. I think Charlie, again, would feel absolutely out of the pocket in the real world. And I think he felt absolutely at home where he could control things and have status in a prison. The more he became the boogeyman that he wasn't, the more respect he got in the prison. And ask any prisoner what respect gets you. The other little fact was that one of your listeners shared with me is that someone professionally cut the telephone lines. So I'd out text, the gentleman climbed up there, and the women certainly didn't climb up there. So this was definitely a professional gig. And the other thing that I forgot to really consider was Roman Polanski, who's well known for having sex with minors, raping minors down to 13 years old. I'm not going to make a big accusation, but I'll tell you what, those kind of guys finding out that they have actually got a baby on the way and maybe a bunch of commitment that needs to go with that might volunteer their wife into a system which already protects what he's doing. A network of scumbags that have sex with kids, it's all the way up as high as you can go. That's how they get away with it. Because if everything was run by a small town, they wouldn't exist anymore. Wouldn't say that they don't exist underneath the covers, but so to speak, metaphorically, pardon the pun. But as soon as they are discovered, it'd be over. So I just wanted to put in the errata for that Charles Manson episode that I screwed up a couple things. I might end up redoing it, but I'm going to give it some time so you don't see the same thing twice. So again, the purpose of this episode is very simple. We just need to advance our conversation about what it is the big cities offer us. They do offer some wonderful things, but I think it comes at almost a permanent price for a lot of people. That's it. If you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. We've had our Facebook group turned off by Facebook. It is under review, so we'll see what happens. The video I posted was very innocent. It was two Nazis from Ukraine saran wrapping two guys that don't want to fight in the war to telephone poles, the steel kind, traffic light poles or whatever, broad daylight, and then pulling their pants down to embarrass them in front of other people. All private parts were heavily, heavily shrouded, meaning you can't even squint your eyes and see anything. So it's already been blessed by the mass media. But because Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook and their controllers want World War III, they don't want anything up there that could change the opinion of these Nazi motherfuckers. So I posted and they immediately gagged the entire group. Now, we did have quite a few violations, and I commend the administrators for that. We're not there to get along with the enemy. Now, I pushed the button for review. We have been in that situation at status several times, and then they always pop back and they go, oh, sorry, we overreacted. But if I never have to go to a Facebook thing again, I'm not going to be the slightest bit unhappy. But what we've done is we've gone off to Telegram. And Telegram is a little bit rough for people. You need a cell phone to get the account started because you need a phone number. There's burner phone numbers you can get. There's Skype phone numbers you can get. They're not real phones. But once you get it set up, then you can use the desktop on your computer But the idea that you're going to participate in correcting the world, but you're not going to use a device that everybody uses, that's like saying, okay, I'm up in a fucking cave on a hill, and unless you come up to this cave through those, 4 million Tibetan steps, then you can't have the information I have. It's like, maybe you're just more of a spectator at this point, Luckily, the videos come out, the podcast vlog or whatever you want to call this comes out, and you don't have to worry about it. But on the website, everything's up there. To the Patreon and PayPal folks, thank you so much and make it happen. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over and out.